Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. And we're very happy to start off this week's show with Agustina Vergara Cid. She has come back to join us here on the show with a great topic. Great to see you once again, Agustina. For those meeting you for the first time, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Ryan. I'm Agustina Vergara Cid, and I write mostly about immigration and intersection with philosophy for young voices.
Boy, there's a lot to talk about concerning immigration, and it would appear that with the very hard focus that the Trump administration has taken, especially on deportations, they may actually be starting to experience some unintended consequences. I'm looking at a piece that you wrote for Real Clear Politics. Kicking out foreign students is a loss for America. I don't think anybody minds if the people who are here to do criminal acts or violent individuals, if they are deported. Talk to me about the students, though, that are being swept up in this net of deportations.
Yeah, so that promise of the Trump administration that, to go after the criminals and the illegal immigrants, well, he's now actually going after legal immigrants and people who are here even temporarily but legally, such as students. So what happened is we started seeing last month the revocation of the student status of many international students to a point where apparently about 5,000 of these legal statuses have been terminated. And part of the problem is that there's no clarity whatsoever as to why that happened. So school officials, so these are people that are studying in U.S. universities, and school officials started seeing that their legal status, their student records were terminated, and they were giving very generic reasons that were actually no explanation at all. So what happened was these students started suing the government, and lawyers started seeing that the only common thread among these students is that they may have had some sort of encounter with the police at some point. But I'm talking about speeding tickets, parking tickets, even dismissed charges from years ago. These sorts of issues have triggered these revocations, which legally should not be the case. A parking ticket is not a reason to revoke the legal status of an international student per the law itself.
No, that makes sense. A few years back, my family and I actually had foreign students, Saudi Arabian students who came and lived with us. And they had police encounters sometimes. It was not a common thing, but it was usually over a misunderstanding of the traffic laws and not because they were being reckless. So when you say, look, these could be very simple violations, I guess the question that looms and nobody's apparently willing to answer it is, so why would the Trump administration take such a harsh stances to revoke their status? And I presume this sets the stage to deport them.
Yes, it does set the stage to deport them. Then the reasons why this is happening, it's honestly one can speculate, but there's no real, good reason for it, I don't think. So apparently, what happened was they ran some sort of program. As of I was reading the news this morning, in the lawsuit they alleged they were essentially matching students who had some sort of record at all, and revoking the status of those students like in mass, even if just any encounter would merit it. I think it was automatized. So part of the issue with this is that, like, imagine that you come here to study and then you are deported over a parking ticket, or I mean, you turn on red when we were not supposed to turn on red. And traffic rules in America are different than they are abroad sometimes. And so what this situation does is creates a lot of uncertainty for the future. It's not just the 5,000 students that are affected by this, that obviously is very stressful. They don't know what to do. Some of them have already left the country. But it's the climate of uncertainty that this creates for potential future students to come to America. Who's going to want to come if they can be deported over a traffic violation? That creates such a climate that is hostile to people who like to know, okay, what are the rules here? How are the rules going to be enforced? One of the biggest assets that a country can have is objective laws and objective enforcement of those laws. So people like to know the rules of the game and how they're going to be implemented and enforced. If you don't know that, well, you may not go to a country and live in a country where you don't know what could land you in an ICE prison, or could, get you deported, which means that you lose everything that you've worked so hard for to come to study in America.
Yeah, as you described that, I mean, to me, The idea that the law means whatever the person interpreting it wants it to mean at the moment, that sounds like the hallmark of a totalitarian kind of regime, not one that would call itself, freedom oriented or democracy.
Yes, so the issue of the objective law is one thing that, it's not just, immigration laws or immigration regulations that are not necessarily objective or their enforcement is not objective. It's a problem that, permeates the legal system in America, unfortunately. And, this does not help, right? This is creating such a climate that, student visas are already so hard to get, and this makes it even harder in terms of someone making the decision to come here may not decide to go through with it. So let me tell you just real quick, like an example to concretize what this means. So imagine there's like a student from like my country, right, like Argentina, and they want to come here and they get us accepted into Harvard. Well, they're right enough to be able to do that, although Harvard is now a little bit controversial, but any university that you like, right? So they have to pay for the tuition, which is extremely expensive, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They have to, usually just pay out of pocket because they don't have a credit history in America, so they can get a student loan. So they put all their savings there. They go through the visa process, which is also expensive. They leave their families, their friends behind to come here. And do you think the smartest people are gonna want to come here if they don't know if they might be deported for something as silly as a parking violation? That's not that's not, I think, a viable strategy. And I think America should be attracting the best talent. I think one of America's you know, virtues is, attracting the best and the brightest that come here to live in freedom. We have so many businesses that are hiring from this pool of talent that the student visas bring to America, because for these visas, students are allowed to work for a year after and then potentially transition into a longer term visa. And businesses really like to hire those people. And, because it expands their pool of talent from just national to international. So it will be also a really big hit on businesses, on American businesses, if these students stop coming.
I'm curious. I'm looking at a quote here from Secretary of State Marco Rubio talking about these visas being revoked due to their holders taking activities that are contrary to our foreign policy. Now, the very first thing that pops into my mind is, oh, were they participating in anti-Israel protests, or could it be expanded to something like that? Because I know that the Trump administration has been cracking down on what it calls, anti-Semitic activities. Does that play into the revocation of these visas?
So I actually spoke with two of the lawyers that are bringing these lawsuits against the administration, and they told me that these students that they represented have nothing to do and had nothing to do whatsoever with the campus protests that erupted after Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th. So there's no connection there. Secretary Ruby was referring to some other visas that were revoked in connection to those issues and Hamas supporters or people critical of Israel, but these students have nothing to do with that. And so there's really what Secretary Rubio said then does not apply to these cases.
Wow. Um, well, now you've really got the wheels in my head turning too. I hope that others will ask these questions of the Trump administration, why this is being done, and um, where is there time for them to turn around and to take a different course? Does it seem to be accelerating in this direction of arbitrarily, revoking these visas?
I mean, we have been seeing the apparently illegal application of immigration law or pushing the immigration law or, just straight up making up rules in immigration to deport illegal immigrants, right? So, uh, and now it's moving to F1 students, and then some people speculate it might move on to other types of visas, like the H-1B visas, which is a very popular visa in America. So, hopefully not. Hopefully this is a mistake, which is bad enough if it's a mistake, but. I really hope the Trump administration, stops the attack at least on legal immigrants.
Again, we are talking with Agustina Vergara Cid. She's a Young Voices contributor. Where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on X at Agustina Visid and Instagram as well. And yeah, you can just Google me and it will pop up right there.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we're happy to welcome Lora Karch back to the program. Lora, there are some folks who'll be meeting you for the very first time. Take a moment, if you will, and tell us a little bit about your background.
Thank you for having me, first and foremost. I'm very happy to be back. My name is Lora Karch. I have an IR background and a master's in diplomacy. I work at a Middle East think tank in downtown DC called Middle East Institute, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, we've got a great topic to talk about today, and that is focusing on immigration, which I know it's a huge topic in America, but it's also quite a topic for other countries as well. The thing I like about your article, though, is it asks the question, look, you got immigration problems? Fix foreign policy first. So let's talk about some of the common immigration problems, and then let's talk about how foreign policy plays into either creating or exacerbating those problems.
Right. So I believe in looking directly at the source, right? So up until today, we have 14 million Syrians who are displaced and have been displaced since 2011, since the beginning of the Arab Spring. Many have ended up in the EU. The top countries right now hosting Syrian refugees are Germany, Sweden, and Austria. My own family's in Sweden, which is now called the Assyrian capital of Europe. Um, you know, uh, another consequence of these hard power policies, we've had over 200,000 civilian deaths to today, and that's only according to one small organization called the Syrian Network for Human Rights. So it's not necessarily the final number. We just this year have over 1,000 civilians dead, about 1,500 total in the post-Assad Syria, as we all saw the coup taking over. And I'm here to talk about just the hypocrisy in our foreign policy today, where today we have a bunch of uprisings and immigration protests in Europe. I think that everyone is kind of seeing these days. Most recently in Dublin, I think a couple of days ago, and the UK also in the past week or so. And, basically the main message that I wanted to send in my article was if we want fewer refugees at our borders, then we need to stop we need to stop dropping bombs on their homes, right? So I feel that American foreign policy has somewhat created the conditions for this mass migration in the first place. So maybe it's best to kind of go look at the source and see what we can do to fix it and maybe bring back public diplomacy in the picture.
Well, I'm 100% on board with what you're talking about here. I have to admit, I don't understand well how and why the U.S. got involved in Syria in the first place, and maybe it's unfair for me to ask you this, but can you give me just a little bit of background? How did the U.S. come to be caught up in that Syrian civil war?
Right, right. I'm going to begin with some context that is public information. So in a 2007 interview with U.S. Army General Wesley Clark, he mentioned a conversation he had with a Pentagon official, and he cited a classified memo that had a plan to take out 7 countries in 5 years in the Middle East. And I think now it's becoming a little more widely known, widely spread. And those 7 countries are Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. There's one country on that list that has yet to be toppled, so
Oof.
I guess we'll see what happens. But moving forward into the timeline. So Spring reached Syria in 2011. Um, the typical uprisings and the government fought back and things like that. 2 years later, this is again public information from the New York Times. The CIA decided to get involved with their Operation Timber Sycamore, and this was under the Obama administration. And it was basically an operation to train and arm Syrian rebels to overthrow the then President Bashar al-Assad. So they succeeded in the arming and the training, but unfortunately, the arms and the different rebels became into different factions. So there was, within the international support for this operation from the UK, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Qatar, it cost the US 1 billion annually, and then resulted in an arms diversion, and in consequence, of course, where US supplied weapons were ending up on the black market in the hands of these extremist groups that were popping up, ISIS, al-Nusra, and all being Al-Qaeda affiliates. We all know Al-Qaeda. And fun fact, not fun fact, but al-Nusra Front actually later evolved into Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is dubbed HTS, and is now Jolani's group, now known as Ahmed al-Shara, the new president of Syria. So as you know, there were a lot of operational challenges, complex dynamics. We had a lot of factions come out of that training and weapons supplier. We have right now at least 3 dominant actors in Syria, other than the U.S. And Russia and Turkey in there. Free Syrian Army. Their objective was originally to overthrow Assad and establish a democratic government. They are one of the groups supported by the U.S. through Timber Sycamore. The SDF, we all know, Syrian Democratic Forces. They're a little more secular, influenced more by the Kurdish autonomy ideals, and then they are now in the north. And they're technically the military wing of the autonomous administration that is now in the north, which the US is also supporting. So there's that complication. Al-Nusra Front was another one that came out of this, and there was more indirect, unintentional support through that weapons leakage on the black market. And, of course, they were known as the Al-Qaeda affiliate, and later, again, evolved into HTS, and then, which was Jolani's group, before his famous rebrand right now. He actually held Idlib. And I think a good way of thinking about what the state of Syria can possibly be today is by looking at how Idlib was controlled under Jolani, which was Sharia law, public executions, still, that Islamist ideology. So that's where the concern comes in. We had troops throughout 2015. In 2016, it was noted that the US dropped over 12,000 bombs to that date. So a lot of the infrastructure in Syria was gone. And then, thankfully, Trump did come in 2017 and decide to end and phase out the program. But unfortunately, this did leave a vacuum that these extremist groups ended up filling. So I would say that's the unfortunate state of Syria today.
I am in awe, first of all, of your grasp of all the different various players and factions that have come into play. And I'm also appalled at
right, too many to count.
Well, and I guess the question that I just can't get out of my mind is, and this affects, or this should be part of U.S. foreign policy, because I don't know how that can be justified. What interest is being protected by having U.S. military involvement or training, going on with those various groups?
Exactly. And I would also add that it brought us into a lot of proxy wars, and us, I mean USA, into a lot of proxy wars in the region. USA versus Russia. We through the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, where Russia was then backing the Assad regime as well. We were awkwardly against Turkish-backed groups, so that NATO alliance saw some strain there. We were actually in the north supporting SDF, and part of the SDF reportedly was the YPG and PKK, some elements there, which are a direct, they have direct animosity with Erdogan, with Turkey. So Turkey literally launched operations against the US supported Turkish groups, which kind of, again, strained the NATO alliance there, and just very, very awkward.
Well, we've got just under a minute left here, but I'd like to bring it back to the refugees. Can anyone wonder why people would want to flee? So many different conflicts. And again, it comes down to, there would have been much less conflict, if any at all, had there just not been that intervention on the part of the U.S. One final question, or about 20 seconds. Do you see a shift in the way that U.S. is approaching its foreign policy, or are we still kind of on the same course?
I hope so. I'm very hopeful that President Trump's trip in May is going to bring a little more public diplomacy into the picture. I'm hoping that he's seen, and the current administration is seeing, the unintended consequences of our foreign intervention, and really it raises the question about how efficient public diplomacy would be in contrast to our covert operations in these high conflict zones.
Again, we were talking with Lora Karch. Lora, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we are back. Welcome to segment 3 of today's Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Ethan Watson back to the program. Ethan, great to see you. Tell us just a little bit about who you are for the sake of those meeting you for the first time.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Ethan. I'm a writer for the Young Voices program. I'm also a prospective law student. I'm going to be an O'Connor Fellow at Arizona State this fall. So blending my unique knowledge of law, business, government, everything in between, and really enjoy writing about Gen Z and social issues as well.
Well, we've got a great topic to discuss here. I'm looking at an article you wrote for Real Clear Politics about KOSMA, KOSMA, which you called the toothless law, important, and also an important wake-up call for families. I'll admit, I was not familiar with the Kids Off Social Media Act. Talk to me a little bit about who came up with this, who's promoting it, and what exactly is this supposed to accomplish?
Well, the interesting thing about KOSMA is it's a bipartisan law. So you've seen figures like Ted Cruz behind it. And essentially what it's trying to do is counteract the negative effects of social media on teenagers. It bans users under 13 from using social media, and also puts restrictions on the algorithm-driven content and advertisements that can be used on users under 17. I think it's a great idea in principle. I think there are huge problems with teenagers and even young adults like my age getting addicted to social media and this quote unquote brain rot content. I think it's super important to talk about that and find ways to combat. However, I don't think legislation at the federal level is the best way to go about this, because I just don't see how it's feasible to enforce that, right? Either it's a toothless law and they just, create another useless administrative agency to enforce it and nothing happens, or they mandate massive data gathering by big tech companies. And either way, let's be honest, if teenagers want to get on something, they're going to do it.
Oh, yeah.
Telling them can't go on Instagram, that's just going to have a Streisand effect where immediately you're coding that thing as rebellious and cool. And so everyone's going to want to do it. Like, I remember when I was 15, all I wanted to do was play rated M 17 plus video games. And I was obsessed with it, and all my friends played them because it's really not that hard to circumvent age controls like this. And so we have to find a better way. I think it starts with the family.
100%. I know for a fact, I'm a father of 6 kids, and the surest way to get them to rebel is to tell them, I forbid you to do this or that. And it's no different when government's saying it. I love, though, you zoom in on what I think is really the most logical solution here when you say parents need to make their children want the real world, as opposed to, well, we will forbid and create all these obstacles to going into virtual reality. What are some of the ways we can help them become reacquainted with the real world and all that it has to offer?
Certainly. And I do want to say first, like, I do think it's good for people to be social media literate. It's sort of a red flag, at least for my generation, if you don't have a social media footprint, at least a little bit. People kind of think you're, some sort of antisocial person or something. And so you want to have that literacy and have that footprint. But you're right, exactly. We want to show kids and have parents show their children the real world is the better place to get your dopamine fix, so to speak, right? To get that fulfillment. And so I really just encourage parents to push their kids outside of their comfort zone a little bit more, because let's be honest, and I don't have kids, so I'm just speculating, but I suspect it's easier to put your kid in front of an iPad and download a bunch of mindless games on there to keep them busy than to take them to go for a hike, or take them out back to play catch, or encourage them to play an instrument or even play a video game together. It's a lot easier to park them on an iPad with its fun sound effects and colors. And at least my algorithm shows me like really large cheeseburgers for some reason. It thinks I like that, which, definitely does keep me scrolling. But it's so much easier to park your kid on that instead of engaging with them and taking them out to these quote unquote third places, the place that isn't work, that isn't school, that is something else, where you can engage with your community. And so just making an effort to show them, no, this is cool. And I had this thought the other day too. We've done a really good job at removing cigarette smoking from many public areas. And sure, there's like laws about that. But I think a large part of it has been the social stigma of, oh, that's so gross. Oh, I hate the smell of that. And so almost, I think parents should point out to their kids, like, oh, look at that kid. He's just on his phone. He's not enjoying the concert or enjoying the baseball game or whatever. Kind of speaking about social media addiction with that disgust and with that stigma, I think can kind of inculcate that feeling about it in kids from a very early age.
Well, I have to thank you for introducing me to the concept of the third place. It makes perfect sense, but you also make the case here that this third place that's not home, it's not work, but kind of it's a neutral place where people can still go and meet face to face. That's something Gen Z and below really haven't known.
No, absolutely not. And I use the TV show Seinfeld as an example in my piece because, they're always at the coffee shop. That's what everyone thinks about. And yeah, my generation doesn't really have that. Like, I've got a bunch of, friends in their early 20s, and we hang out like, whenever we plan something, we don't all just show up at a local coffee shop, a local bar, whatever it might be, to have that interaction. We have to plan it out, and it has to be a real process. And the third place was where it all happened. That's where you went to get caught up with someone. Now you just fire up Instagram. That's where you went to meet people. Now you gotta buy Hinge Premium or something if you even want a fighting chance. Like it's absolutely absurd how the little dopamine machines in our pockets have replaced that glorious, comforting third place. And it really makes me sad for my generation because it makes it harder to make friends. It makes it harder to date. It makes you uncomfortable. And why would you ever pick discomfort when you have the thing in your pocket that gives you videos of attractive people and fun sound effects and addictive, catchy music and everything else? Like, why would you ever put yourself out there and have a real experience when you can pick that?
No, that's a good point. Now let's bring it back to Congress and what they're trying to accomplish here with KOSMA. You've listed some very real concerns, and I think some very realistic challenges. Why is this Keeping Kids Off Social Media Act the wrong way to try to address these issues?
I just don't see how federal legislation, sweeping broad bans can address this issue. I don't think they can enforce it without requiring social media companies to collect data, a ton of user data, everybody who's using to filter out who's 13, who's 17, and tranche out their user bases like that. Um, and how would they monitor that? Would they government them to look at their user bases? I think this creates a lot of bloat and a lot of data gathering, privacy issues. I mean, we already know they're stealing our data, but it just gives them a legal reason to do so. And I don't think we need
Right.
to do that. And also, as with many of these issues, I don't think there's a one size fits all solution to this. To social media differently. Some people have no problem with it. Friends that are like that, where they just turn their phone off for days. It's like, oh, where did he go? I haven't heard from him in weeks. And then there's other people who can't sit through a football game without whipping out Instagram. And so there's not a one size fits all for this, which is, again, why it belongs in the most basic unit of our society, which is the family, right? Parents know their kids. They know if they have addictive personalities, and they can mitigate and mediate and say, okay, here's the right amount of exposure to this. But a one size fits all approach, for everybody across the country of varying ages. And frankly, let me point out too that a 14-year-old is a lot different than a 17-year-old. There's a lot of behavioral differences there as well, and boys and girls as well are different. So I just don't think you can have a one size fits all approach at the federal level. It's just going to create more bloat.
I love the very last one of the very last points you make here is, look, kids want to be on social media, they're going to be there. What can we do to make them not want to be on social media? In other words, what's a better alternative? I liken it to, I want to live in a drug-free society, but I don't want to live in a drug-free society because everybody has a figurative gun pointed at their head saying, don't take drugs, but because they say, I want to live healthy. I want to have a fulfilling life, and drugs would prevent me from doing that. There's a huge difference in the approach there.
Absolutely. And so I think that's why just making people not want the drug, which social media is a drug, it activates dopamine in your brain. But is anyone who's laid in bed, brain rotting before, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners out there have, at least I know I have, you feel terrible, right? You feel like drained. And so giving kids access to the good dopamine of learning something new, of exercising, of making a friend, that warm feeling you get when you're like, I'm with my friends right now, just putting them in that scenario as much as possible to get them to associate those positive feelings with these actually positive actions. That's the way that we combat this. And not by taking the phone away, but saying, do you really want to play on that right now? Or let's go do something real, and being persuasive and forceful when you're advocating for that.
I love the fact that you worked the phrase touch grass into
Yeah.
that article, which it means totally different things than it did when I was a kid, but there's a lot of accuracy there. We're talking with
Absolutely.
Ethan Watson. He's a Young Voices contributor. Ethan, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on X at ERWatson13. I do use that. I'm trying to use it a little bit more, trying to swap out Instagram for that, and hopefully be more productive with my social media usage.
Welcome back. This is our fourth and final segment of Moving Forward with Young Voices today. And we are happy to welcome back to the program Daniel Idfresne. Daniel, good to see you once again.
Thank you for having me.
So for the sake of the people who haven't met you yet, take just a moment and tell us about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I'm Daniel Idfresne. I'm a Young Voices Social Mobility Fellow, a junior at Syracuse University, and I'm from New York City, and I like to write about Gen Z politics, New York City issues, and pretty much anything that intrigues my interest, which happen to be tariffs, because it's intriguing everyone's interest right now, and I guess that's the subject of our conversation today.
It has been on a lot of people's minds, and I love that your article here, published in realclearpolitics.com, companies test Apple's playbook to dodge Trump's new tariff regime. I remember hearing that Apple was one of the very first ones to announce that in response to tariffs, there were some changes that they were going to make. For those who aren't familiar with that story, tell us about what they decided to do.
Yeah, so Apple decided to make a $500 billion investment into the United States to increase the amount of money that they will invest in manufacturing facilities. That's called their Advanced Manufacturing Fund. They pledge also to create more American jobs and to create a new campus in Austin, Texas. Although I believe that maybe the first time they did it or the second time. Overall, when Trump announced when Trump honestly won the election, Apple and many other companies decided to start making their announcements on American investment. And what's very interesting is that this is the first time Apple has made this investment. Apple made a $350 billion contribution to the American economy. That's what they called it. During Trump's first term, and it seemed to be very successful for them. During that first term, they were able to dodge tariffs on their flagship products, including the MacBook, iPhone, iPad, and it seems like they're taking a similar route this time around. Now, the question is, will it work the same way it did during Trump's first term? And that we're going to have to wait and see to find out.
I mean, on the one hand, you know, when I read, wow, $2.8 trillion in business projects and pledges in America, that's fantastic. But then there's another part of that I go, but they only did it after the government, you know, threatened to put these tariffs in place. In other words, there was some leverage that was being used. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing for the government to use that economic leverage in persuading, I'm going to put that in air quotes, persuading companies to, you know, do more business here at home?
And that's a big question, Brian. And that's a question I'm sort of dealing with myself when I'm writing these pieces on tariffs. And you can say that in a way, the easy answer or the most simple answer to that question is not necessarily no. And we've seen the government create incentives for businesses to invest and to create jobs in America. They're just done in different ways. I mean, we could talk about Biden's CHIPS Act when he pretty much gave big companies, big tech companies, pretty much a stimulus fund to create, semiconductor chip factories in America. I mean, our entire tax code, in a way, every single time when we're debating on the tax code and what we're going to change, part of the question is, how are we going to ensure that we keep taxes, or we make sure taxes are done in a way where companies are incentivized to do their business in America as opposed to Europe, for example, and tariffs is just a very, Trumpian way of creating those incentives. But then there's, an even a hidden question after that, which is, are these investments already projections that businesses are making to produce in America, or are they actually investments that these businesses make, are planning to make or deciding to make because of the tariffs? And my article explores that. The article in Real Clear Politics, there are some companies like Apple that, in response to Trump's tariffs, they made that $350 billion contribution to the United States. They added to their advanced manufacturing fund. We saw that after they announced that contribution, they did add 17,000 new jobs to the American economy. But then there's other companies like General Motors who also made announcements that they're going to invest in the United States. But ultimately, their company did not do well during those 4 years during the Trump administration, and they had to walk back on many of those promises. And so over the next few years during this term, we're going to see some companies who are actually, announcing these investments and following through with them, and then other companies who are making these investments to get on the good side of the Trump administration, but we might not actually see the results we might not see the announcement materialize, I should say.
So I think of myself as someone who really prefers the free market wherever possible. And I guess the question I have for you is, it sounds like there can be some positive results from tariffs. They may take a little time, but they can actually help balance, the field there of trade. Does that violate the concept of the free market, though? It does kind of feel like an intervention on the part of government. But at the same time, if all the other trading partners are doing it too, maybe it's a necessary thing. I'm not sure how to approach that.
It's 100% an intervention. I mean, nothing about what Trump is doing with individual companies. I know right now he is trying to strike a deal with U.S. automakers, or whether other nations. Right now the Trump administration is making trade deals with other nations and trying to reorder the global trade. None of that is all of that is antithetical to free markets. But the question is, and I guess it's an individual question for those who may be more libertarian when it comes to free markets, and others who may not mind more government intervention within free markets. How much is what Trump is doing? How much of that are you okay with? And I mean, we've seen with the markets, especially on Liberation Day, many of those in the U.S. markets are not happy with it. But then again, we're looking at a subset of those of the American population, those who are engaged with the market. I mean, obviously, those who are engaged directly with U.S. markets would rather have the global trade system as is right now. But for others, and I think this is the chief contention that the Trump administration is making, those who don't really have a stake in the U.S. markets don't really care as much. And I think ultimately, when it comes to tariffs, when it comes to all policy, quite frankly, we tend to jump the gun, commentators and experts and whatnot, but we really don't see the effect of policy until 3, 4, 5 years down the line. And then American people decide which policy is better. That's what we saw with the Biden administration, for example.
One final question. We've got just about 30 seconds left here. Daniel, are there any American companies that have announced that because of tariffs, they would be relocating their operations, outside of the U.S., or is that counterintuitive to even consider it with the prospect of tariffs?
Well, yeah, not that I know of. I think it would be extremely counterintuitive the way Trump tends to be, I guess, for lack of a better term, more bombastic. I think if a company announced that they would be shifting production away from the United States, we would know about it on Truth Social immediately.
Yeah, they would be singled out for some special attention, I'm sure.
100%.
Again, we are talking with Daniel Idfresne. He is a junior at Syracuse University and also Young Voices Social Mobility Fellow. Daniel, for people who want to follow your work, where can they find it, and where can they find you on social media?
You can find me on X, Daniel Idfresne. My last name is a bit hard to spell. It's spelled Idfresne. And there you can pretty much find what I'm doing and my latest work and whatnot. So give it a look.
Okay, great to visit with you once again. I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you so much. All good?